On Christmas Eve, my stepson shoved me away from the table and said, "That seat belongs to my dad. Get out." I'm a man who deals in facts, loads, and structural integrity. I'm a civil engineer by trade. In my world, if the foundation is cracked, you don't just paint over it. You tear the whole thing down before the roof collapses on your head. I should have listened to my own professional advice years ago when it came to my marriage. I've lived in the same city my whole life, worked my tail off, and built a solid reputation. I bought my house, a massive 5-bedroom place with a wraparound porch and a custom kitchen, long before I ever met my wife. It was my pride and joy, paid for with my own sweat and a timely inheritance from my grandfather. When I met my wife, 39, female, I thought I was being a hero. She was struggling, coming out of a disastrous relationship with her ex-husband, a guy who treated life like one long vacation he expected everyone else to pay for. She had a son, my stepson, 19, male, who was then just a kid. I stepped in. I provided. I gave them a life they hadn't even dreamed of. I paid for the private schools, the club sports, the designer clothes, and eventually the tuition for a university he barely attended. I thought that by being a provider, I was earning a seat at the table of their hearts. I was wrong. I was just the guy holding the checkbook while they waited for the cool dad to reappear. The cracks started showing about a year ago. The ex-husband, a guy who hadn't paid a dime in child support in a decade, suddenly found his calling as some kind of life coach or whatever nonsense he was peddling. He started sniffing around. Instead of shutting it down, my wife started welcoming it. She said she wanted her son to have a complete family. I pointed out that I had been his father for the better part of 7 years, but she just brushed me off, saying I didn't understand the bond of blood. That brings us to Christmas Eve. This was supposed to be the big one. My parents flew in, my sister and her husband were there, and my wife had invited her whole side of the family too. I had spent thousands on the catering, the decorations, and the gifts under the tree. The house smelled like pine and expensive bourbon. I felt good. I felt like, despite the weirdness with the ex-husband lately, I had finally built something unbreakable. Dinner was announced. The dining room was glowing. My father, a man who worked 40 years in a steel mill, was sitting to my right. My mother was next to him. I walked to the head of the table, the seat I have sat in every single night for years. It's a heavy, high-backed oak chair. As I reached for it, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Not a gentle hand, a grip. I turned, and my stepson was standing there. He's grown tall, mostly on the expensive steaks and organic groceries I pay for. He looked at me with this sheer, unadulterated contempt. Before I could ask what was up, he didn't just move me, he shoved. He used his full weight and braced himself. I wasn't expecting it. My socks slid on the polished hardwood, my legs tangled in the chair legs, and I went down. I hit the floor hard. The sound was like a wet thud, followed by the clatter of silverware. My elbow barked against the floor, and for a second the room went blurry. I expected a gasp. I expected my wife to scream his name. I expected someone to help me up. "That seat belongs to my dad. Get out," my stepson said. He wasn't even shouting. He was calm. He was entitled. He looked at me like I was a squatter in my own home. I looked up from the floor, my hip throbbing, and I found my wife's eyes. She was standing by the sideboard holding a crystal pitcher. She didn't move. She didn't even look angry. She looked bored. She looked at me, then looked down at the table, adjusted a napkin, and said, "Honestly, it's just a chair. He's been through a lot lately. Just take the folding chair from the kitchen and sit at the end. Don't ruin the night." Then the front door opened. In walked the ex-husband. He didn't knock. He had a key. My wife had given him a key to my house. He walked in, wearing a leather jacket I'm pretty sure my wife bought him with our joint grocery money, and he sat down in my chair. He didn't even acknowledge I was on the floor. He just started talking to my stepson about a football game. My father started to stand up, his face turning a dangerous shade of red, but I caught his hand. I felt a coldness wash over me that I've never felt before. It wasn't anger. It was the feeling an engineer gets when they realize a bridge is beyond repair and the only safe thing left to do is controlled demolition. I got up, I didn't say a word. I didn't brush off my pants. I just walked out of the room. I went upstairs to my office and locked the door. I could hear the laughter starting downstairs. They thought they had won. They thought I was the beta who would just sulk in the corner while they enjoyed the feast I paid for. They forgot one very important detail. I don't just build things. I own things. See, I'm a meticulous man. When I married my wife, I knew she had a history of financial instability. I kept my assets separate. The house was mine before the marriage, the cars were in my name or my company's name, even the cellular plan and the streaming services were all tied to my primary business account. I had a post-nuptial agreement drafted a year ago when I first suspected she was funneling money to her ex-husband, though she didn't know the evidence yet. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. My hands weren't shaking, they were steady. First, I called my lawyer. He's a shark who specializes in high-asset divorces. He answered on the second ring. It happened, I told him. The physical shove, the wife's refusal to intervene, and the third party entering the home with a key I didn't authorize. Execute the filing. You sure? He asked. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I want the emergency protective order filed electronically tonight. I want the locks changed by morning. I want the full works. Then I started the digital teardown. Most people don't realize how much of their rights are actually just privileges paid for by someone else. I logged into the master account for our mobile phones. I didn't just suspend the lines, I reported the devices, which I paid for in full, as revoked. Within seconds, my wife's phone and my stepson's phone downstairs would become bricks. Next, the credit cards. I had given them both authorized user cards for emergencies. I canceled them. I saw a pending charge from a local liquor store from an hour ago. That was the last dime they'd ever spend of mine. Then I went to my garage through the back stairs. My wife's USV was sitting there. My stepson's sedan was next to it. I have the spare keys in my office. I went out, opened the hoods, and pulled the relays for the fuel pumps. They weren't going anywhere. I came back inside and packed a small bag. I didn't need much. I went back to the dining room. They were mid-meal. The ex-husband was carving the turkey, my turkey. I'm leaving, I said quietly. Good, my stepson snapped. The air feels better already. My wife didn't even look up from her wine. We'll talk in the morning when you've calmed down. Oh, we definitely will, I said. I walked out, went to my parents' hotel, and spent the night watching the snow fall. I didn't sleep much, but I felt light. The next morning, Christmas Day, I didn't wake up to Merry Christmas texts.
To 23 missed calls. The first few were from my wife, likely wondering why her phone wasn't working. The next few were increasingly frantic. Then came the ones from her mother, her sister, and finally a few blocked numbers, which I assumed were the ex-husband trying to use a burner. At 7 a.m., I arrived back at my house with two things, a locksmith and a private security team. The guests were still there. They had stayed the night. They were probably planning a nice Christmas breakfast. I walked in the front door. My wife was in the kitchen, looking at her dead phone with a look of pure confusion. When she saw me, she started to lay into me. What did you do to my phone? And the car won't start. We were supposed to go to my mom's. It's not your phone, I said. It's my phone. And it's not your car. It's my car. And as of 8 minutes ago, this isn't your house. The security guys stepped into the foyer. They weren't small guys. My stepson came out of the living room looking like he was ready to play tough again. He saw the guards and stopped in his tracks. What is this? He stammered. This is the end of the line, I said. I've filed an emergency petition for divorce. I've also filed for a temporary restraining order citing the physical assault from last night. You shoved me in my own home. I have the Nest footage of the whole thing. The judge signed off on the emergency removal of the hostile party to prevent further domestic escalation. You have 15 minutes to put your clothes in a trash bag. Anything you don't take now stays here until the court-ordered supervised pickup in 2 weeks. My wife started screaming. It was a sound I'll never forget, the sound of someone realizing their golden goose just flew away. You can't do this. It's Christmas. Where are we supposed to go? Ask the guy in my chair, I said. He's the real dad, right? I'm sure he's got plenty of room in that studio apartment he's been crashing in. The ex-husband emerged from the guest room, looking disheveled and suddenly very small. He looked at the security guards, then at me, then at the floor. He didn't say a word. He didn't defend my wife. He didn't defend his son. He just grabbed his leather jacket and headed for the door. "Wait!" my wife cried out to him. "Where are you going?" "I can't be around legal trouble, babe. I've got stuff to do." And he walked out, leaving them standing there in the middle of my foyer. That was the first victory. Seeing the look on my stepson's face when he realized his hero was a coward was worth every penny I'd spent on the lawyers. They left. It wasn't pretty. They were crying, screaming, and hurling insults. My stepson tried to lunge at me one last time, but the security guards intercepted him before he got within 3 feet. They were escorted to the curb with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a few bags of toiletries. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal maneuvers. In the U.S., especially in my state, the law regarding premarital property is very clear as long as you don't commingle the funds. Because I had paid for everything out of a separate account and never put her name on the deed, she had zero claim to the house. The entitlement she felt didn't translate to legal ownership. She tried to fight. Oh, did she try. Her lawyer tried to argue that because she maintained the home, she was entitled to half the value. My lawyer responded with producing the spreadsheet of every dollar I had spent on her son's lifestyle. We showed that the maintenance she provided was vastly outweighed by the lifestyle subsidies I had provided. Then came the dirty tricks. She tried to claim I was abusive. She went to the police to try and get a cross-restraining order. But I was 3 steps ahead. I had saved every text message she sent me over the last year. I had recordings of her admitting she was only with me for the stability. I even had a statement from the catering staff who saw the shove on Christmas Eve. When we got to the courthouse for the first hearing, the silence was deafening. My wife sat at the table with her lawyer, looking haggard. The cool dad was nowhere to be found. He had skipped town the moment he realized there was no money left to be had. The judge didn't take long. He looked at the video from the dining room. He looked at the financial records. He looked at the premarital deed. "This is a short-term marriage with no biological children," the judge said, his voice echoing in the marble room. "The petitioner has clearly demonstrated that the property is non-marital. The respondent's claims for spousal support are denied based on the evidence of her bad faith conduct and the lack of financial contribution to the estate." I watched her face crumble. She realized that the life she had built on my back was gone. She realized by letting her son shove me, she had shoved herself right out of a multi-million-dollar life. But I wasn't done. See, I'm an engineer. I like to make sure the job is finished. My stepson had been bragging to his friends about the inheritance he was going to get one day. He'd even taken out some private loans for a business venture using me as a guarantor by forging my signature on some digital documents. I found out about it during the discovery phase of the divorce. I didn't just report it. I pressed charges. A week after the divorce was finalized, he was served with a warrant for identity theft and forgery. He didn't have me to pay for a high-priced lawyer anymore. He had to use a public defender. He ended up with a felony on his record and 5 years of probation. His business collapsed before it even started. My wife ended up moving back with her mother in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment. She tried to call me a few months later, sounding small and defeated. She said she made a mistake. She said she missed the family we had. I don't have a family. I have a house, and you're not in it. I hung up and blocked the number. The revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't a movie scene with explosions. It was the quiet, methodical removal of people who thought they could take what I built without giving anything in return. It was the sound of my front door locking and knowing that the only people who have a key are the people who actually respect me. Now I sit at the head of my table every night. The food is quieter, but it tastes a lot better when you don't have to worry about who's plotting to take your seat. The foundation is finally solid. The structure is secure. And for the first time in a long time, the house feels like a home. If you want to see more structures of entitlement get demolished by the truth, make sure to subscribe so you're in the front row for the next project.